Open the door, ma'am. This property is under law enforcement orders. The voice was so loud it didn't sound real. It tore through my sleep like an explosion, followed by another command and the thud of boots on my porch. My heart shot straight into my throat. Through the blinds, streaks of red and blue light bled across my living room walls, flashing, strobing, blinding. For a second, I thought the sheriff's department had surrounded my house. I stumbled to the front window, barely able to breathe. 3 men stood in my driveway, wearing dark tactical vests with patches that said community enforcement. They carried radios, flashlights, and the kind of authority that makes your stomach twist. The biggest one was yelling through a bullhorn. "Rachel Carter, step out with your hands visible. This is your final warning." My son Ethan shouted from upstairs. "Mom, what's happening?" His voice cracked in terror. "Stay upstairs," I screamed back. "Don't come down." I pressed my face to the glass. Their badges shimmered under the flashing lights. But something about them looked wrong. Cheap, like toy metal under real bulbs. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. I dialed 911, whispering the address before I could think. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said calmly, "we don't have any deputies assigned to that location tonight." "Are you sure they're from our office?" I froze. "They're wearing badges. They have lights. They said they're law enforcement." "Lock your doors," she said firmly. "We're sending a unit, but no one from our department is there right now." "Stay inside." The room spun. My knees felt weak. Who were these people pretending to be police in the middle of the night? Outside, one of the men shouted again, "You're in violation of HOA Code 4A, failure to comply with security directives." "Security directives?" I whispered to myself. What does that even mean? They stepped closer to my door, flashlights sweeping across the porch. I could hear their boots scraping the wood, heavy and deliberate. I clutched Ethan's baseball bat, just in case. Then suddenly, their leader, a tall, broad man with slicked-back gray hair, slammed his fist on the door. "You think ignoring the board makes you untouchable?" he yelled. "You'll regret this." Something about his voice burned into my memory. I'd heard it before. It was Gerald Hines, the HOA president. My stomach dropped. The flashing light suddenly cut off. The men turned, their radios hissing with static. One muttered, "Forget it. She's recording." Then they walked back to a black SUV parked by the curb. No license plates, no markings, just a small magnetic sheriff's star decal slapped onto the side door. As the SUV rolled away, I stood frozen, gripping the bat, my ears ringing in the sudden silence. I could still smell the burnt rubber from their tires as they disappeared around the corner. Minutes passed before I dared to unlock the door. The porch light flickered over my shaking hands as I noticed something taped to the front door. A sheet of thick paper, official-looking, printed with legal jargon and bold red letters that read, "Notice of Law Enforcement Action, authorized by HOA Law Division." At the bottom was a shiny gold sheriff's star. Embossed, detailed, almost real. I ran my fingers over the seal. It felt raised, expensive, deliberate. Whoever made this wanted it to look official. For a moment the world went quiet except for the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. That's when the fear turned into anger. Whoever these men were, they'd crossed a line, and I was going to find out exactly who gave them permission to act like police. But I didn't realize it yet. That night was only the beginning. Because in Maple Hollow Estates, the HOA didn't just write the rules, they pretended to enforce the law. And someone was about to make me pay for questioning it. When I looked down again, that golden sheriff's star seemed to shimmer under my porch light, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. Around here, we follow the rules, Miss Carter. Even the sheriff knows that. That's what Gerald Hines told me the day I moved into Maple Hollow Estates. I still remember the Texas sun bouncing off his white polo, the embroidered HOA logo sitting proudly over his heart, and that perfect politician smile. He shook my hand like we were sealing a deal. At the time, I thought I'd found the kind of neighborhood every single mom dreams of. Quiet, safe, and picture perfect. The lawns were trimmed with military precision. Every flower bed looked copy-pasted from a catalog. Children's laughter echoed down cul-de-sacs lined with identical mailboxes, each painted the same shade of forest green. After years of living in cramped apartments, it felt like peace. The kind that smells like fresh-cut grass and new beginnings. Gerald gave me a welcome packet and a warning wrapped in charm. "We take pride in order here," he said. "Our HOA isn't just a board. It's the backbone of this community. The sheriff's department even consults us sometimes on neighborhood safety." I laughed politely, not realizing I was shaking hands with a man who believed that made him judge, jury, and executioner. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. My son, Ethan, finally had space to ride his bike. We made small talk with neighbors over backyard fences. The HOA newsletter came every week, full of cheerful notes about block parties, bake sales, and neighborhood watch updates. It felt like a storybook suburb. But behind every manicured hedge, something about Maple Hollow felt rehearsed. Too coordinated, too controlled. The first warning came just after Labor Day. A letter appeared in my mailbox saying my porch light was non-compliant with aesthetic standards. I didn't even know what that meant. A week later, another notice. Mailbox color inconsistent with approved shade range. Apparently, the deep green I'd chosen wasn't HOA-approved Maple Hollow Forest No. 3. When I called Gerald to ask if it was a mistake, he laughed, that same fake warmth in his tone. "Not a mistake, Ms. Carter. We just keep things uniform around here. It keeps property values high. You understand?" I told him I'd repaint the mailbox when I had time. He replied, "That's good. We wouldn't want to escalate this." The next notice came addressed in bold red font. "Violation, $250 fine." The envelope was heavy, sealed with gold embossing. When I tore it open, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A gold sheriff's star stamped in the corner of the page. Underneath it read, "Community Enforcement Division. Authorized by HOA Law Liaison." It looked official, too official. I held it up to the light, wondering if the HOA really had ties to law enforcement, like Gerald had hinted. I even laughed at the absurdity of it. Who stamps HOA fines with sheriff's stars? But the letters didn't stop. Every week, another violation. Ethan's pickup truck parked on the street overnight, $100 fine. My flagpole, too tall for HOA aesthetic standards, $75 fine. A bird feeder, attracting nuisance wildlife, $50 fine. Each envelope carried the same gold seal, the same eerie imitation of authority. Neighbors started looking at me differently, as if I were bringing trouble to the block. Gerald's words echoed in my head. "Around here, we follow the rules." But it wasn't just the rules anymore. It was obedience. Control disguised as order. One evening, after repainting my mailbox for the third time, I sat on my porch and watched a white HOA truck cruise by slowly. The driver waved without smiling. The gold logo on his door glinted under the sunset. For the first time, Maple Hollow didn't feel like home. It felt like surveillance. Still, I tried to shake it off. I told myself every community had quirks. Every HOA had rules. I had no idea that the gold seal on those notices wasn't just for show. It was a warning, a declaration of power. The next morning, when I looked closely at the footage I'd taken during the fake police visit, my stomach dropped. The same gold seal, the exact same one from those violation letters, was printed on the chests of the men who had come to my door in the middle of the night. That's when I realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing neighborhood rules. They were pretending to enforce the law. And somehow, everyone in Maple Hollow seemed perfectly fine with it. "Ma'am, this looks like a county sheriff's seal, and that's illegal to copy." The clerk's voice was flat, but the words sliced through the stale air of the county office like a blade. I stood there, clutching the fine notice with both hands, still. Creased from the night, I tore it off my door. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as I tried to process what she'd just said. I had driven straight to the county administration building that morning, determined to find out if my HOA really had any connection to law enforcement. The notice in my hand claimed Joint Enforcement Authority between Maple Hollow Estates and the County Sheriff's Department. It sounded absurd, but after being woken by men dressed as police, absurdity had become my reality. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a Tarrant County office badge, turned the letter over and examined the gold seal under a magnifier. She frowned. "This is not one of ours," she said quietly. "See this? The outer ring says Community Enforcement Liaison Division. That's not a county department. Somebody designed this to look official." I felt heat rush to my face. So the HOA made this up. They're pretending to be law enforcement? She nodded slowly. They don't have any partnership with us. None. And if they're using our seal or anything that resembles it, that's a violation of state code. You might want to report this to the sheriff's office. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stepped back into the sunlight outside. Gerald's words from the day I moved in echoed again. Even the sheriff knows that. I had believed it back then. I had believed all of it. That evening, I decided I wasn't going to be intimidated anymore. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days, and I planned to be there. Not as a silent homeowner, but as someone demanding answers. When I walked into the Maple Hollow clubhouse that Thursday night, every conversation stopped. The air was heavy with the faint scent of coffee and tension. Gerald sat at the front of the room, leaning back in his chair like a man who owned the place. The rest of the board, 3 members I barely knew, flanked him, their expressions unreadable. I held up the notice. "You've been sending these to homeowners. Do you care to explain why this seal looks like it came straight from the county sheriff's office?" Gerald's lips curled into that familiar, confident smirk. "Rachel," he said smoothly, "we've discussed this before. The Maple Hollow Board has special authorization for neighborhood enforcement. We work closely with law enforcement to keep this community safe." I took a step forward. "I checked with the county today. There's no such partnership. What you're doing could be a crime." He didn't even flinch. "You think you can challenge community authority? You think the sheriff's office has time to worry about a few fines?" He turned to the board. "This is exactly the kind of resident who ruins neighborhoods, rebellious, entitled, and disrespectful of order." The room murmured in agreement. I felt their eyes on me, cold and judging. My fingers trembled, but I lifted my phone discreetly, pressing record. If he was going to lie to my face, I was going to have proof. Gerald leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You might want to stop before you ruin everything for yourself." I left the meeting shaken, but more certain than ever. Something far darker than HOA politics was at play here. The next morning, there was an envelope on my porch. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with typed words, "Stop before you ruin everything." I crumpled it, trying to ignore the chill crawling up my spine. Someone was watching me. Someone wanted me quiet. By the weekend, I'd convinced myself it was just Gerald trying to scare me. But then, as I walked out of the grocery store late Sunday night, I froze. Tucked under my windshield wiper was another note. It was typed, just like the last one, but this time, the message was different. "Law enforcement stands with the board." The same gold sheriff's star was printed in the corner, gleaming under the streetlight like a thread I couldn't unsee. That's when I realized Gerald's reach went far beyond Maple Hollow, and the people backing him weren't just neighbors anymore. "Put that phone down. You're interfering with an active enforcement operation." The shout sliced through the night like a whip. My heart slammed against my ribs as I crouched behind my living room curtain, the camera light from my phone catching just enough of the black SUV parked at the end of my driveway. It was nearly 2 a.m., dead quiet, and yet there they were again. The same men from before. Their dark silhouettes moved methodically under the glare of a streetlight. They wore the same tactical vests stamped Community Enforcement Division across the back. The same knockoff sheriff stars sewn crooked onto their chests. One held a clipboard. The other swept a flashlight across my property like he was mapping out a crime scene. I started filming, whispering to myself, "Not this time." My voice trembled, but I kept the camera steady. If they thought they could terrorize me in the dark, I was going to show the world what this HOA was doing. Suddenly, a radio crackled from the SUV. A deep voice came through. Clear, commanding, and painfully familiar. Copy that. Check the perimeter. Make sure she's in violation. We'll escalate if needed. It was Gerald Hines, my HOA president, giving orders like a police captain. The sound of his voice sent a jolt down my spine. I zoomed in on the SUV's window, hoping to catch a license plate, but when my flashlight reflected off the glass, one of the men turned toward me. His eyes met mine through the blinds. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his hand. "Put that phone down. You're interfering with an active enforcement operation." I dropped instinctively, heart pounding, as his boots stomped up my walkway. The porch creaked under his weight. I crawled toward the hallway, clutching my phone, praying he wouldn't try the door. Through the crack of the blinds, I saw him stop just short of my porch light, whispering something into his radio. Then both men returned to the SUV, climbed in, and drove off without headlights. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The blue glow of my phone screen was the only light in the room as I uploaded the footage straight to the sheriff's department's online reporting portal. I even typed a note at the bottom. "These men are impersonating law enforcement under my HOA's direction. Please investigate." By sunrise, I still hadn't heard back. But one thing was certain. I wasn't imagining this anymore. They were operating like a private police force, under Gerald's command. Around 9 a.m., a sharp clang at my mailbox made me jump. I stepped outside in my robe, only to find Gerald himself standing at the curb, immaculate as ever in his pressed khakis and HOA logo polo. He smiled, but his eyes were hard. "Morning, Rachel," he said. "Just dropping off official notice. You might want to check your mail before rumors start flying." He walked away before I could speak. My hand shook as I opened the envelope he'd just slipped in. Notice of defamation. Fine. $5,000. The reason stated, unauthorized dissemination of confidential HOA enforcement footage and false statements against the board. I laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. It wasn't enough for him to send fake cops to my door. Now he was fining me for filming it. I grabbed my phone, reread the statute Deputy Walker had mentioned during our last conversation. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 912, impersonation of an officer of the United States or any department thereof is punishable by fine and imprisonment. Gerald's fake community enforcement was more than harassment. It was a federal crime. The realization gave me just enough courage to keep pushing. I scanned my phone again, double-checking that my video had uploaded successfully. It had. The HOA could find me all they wanted. But the truth was already in the sheriff's hands. That night, as I poured a glass of water before bed, I heard a single, deliberate knock at the door. 3 taps, slow, firm. I froze. Then a man's voice spoke through the wood, calm, steady, authoritative. "Ma'am, I'm with the sheriff's department. We need to talk about your video." My hand hovered over the lock, torn between relief and terror. Because after everything that had happened, I couldn't tell anymore who was real and who was pretending. "I've seen this scam before, and your HOA's at the center of it." The man standing on my porch wasn't like the others. His badge caught the light just right. Real metal, not some shiny toy store replica. His uniform was crisp, his expression calm but serious. When he spoke, his tone carried the weight of authority, not the performance of it. "I'm Deputy Walker," he said, lowering his flashlight. "Tarrant County Sheriff's Office. You're Rachel Carter, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "You saw the video?" He gave a slow nod. "We did, and you were right to send it. Those men don't work for us, and that seal your HOA is using, it's fake. I've seen this scam before, but never this organized." For the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest crack of relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. Walker stepped inside after I gestured toward the living room. The glow from my lamp painted tired shadows across his face. "We've had 3 other reports from Maple Hollow," he said. "Homeowners describing people in uniforms, handing out citations, threatening fines. One even said they were told a law enforcement partnership gave the HOA power to enforce county code. That's fraud, Mrs. Carter." I sank into my couch, clutching my coffee mug just to keep my hands from shaking. "So what do I do? They've been outside my house at night, pretending to be cops. Gerald's behind it. I know he is." Walker studied me carefully. "We're building a case. You've already given us evidence, but we need more. For now, don't confront him. Don't tell anyone you've spoken with us. People like Hines, they thrive on fear. The quieter you move, the more power you have." He took my phone, scrolled through my footage, and a faint smile touched his face when he saw the clear shot of the fake badges. "This is gold. Keep your camera ready, but stay safe. You're in the middle of something bigger than HOA nonsense." As he left, he paused by the door. "Lock up, Mrs. Carter. And if you see that SUV again, don't go near it." The door clicked shut, leaving me in silence. For the first time, I believed someone might actually stop Gerald, but I didn't realize how hard he'd fight back once he knew I'd gone to the authorities. By the next morning, word had already spread. Gerald must have found out I'd spoken to law enforcement, because when I pulled up to the clubhouse for the HOA's community meeting, every head turned toward me. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Gerald stood at the podium, his smile tight, his voice booming through the speakers. "We've had some residents spreading dangerous lies about this board. False claims, accusations against our trusted partners." His eyes locked on mine. "And we will not tolerate defamation in this community. Remember, we're a family here. We handle our own problems." The message wasn't subtle. After the meeting, I tried to greet a few neighbors. They avoided eye contact, murmured excuses, and hurried away. The same people who used to wave when I walked my dog now crossed the street to avoid me. The isolation was suffocating. That night, I noticed something new. A black sedan parked 2 houses down. Engine off. Windows tinted. It sat there for hours, never moving. When I finally stepped onto the porch to get a closer look, it started up and rolled away without headlights. I knew I was being watched. From that night on, I wrote everything down. Dates, times, license plates, every incident. I took pictures, recorded audio, documented every whisper of harassment. My phone became my lifeline, my shield. Still, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the house made me flinch. Every car that slowed near the curb made my stomach knot tighter. I was trapped between a neighborhood that thought I was the enemy and a man who was using power like a weapon. A few days later, my phone buzzed in the middle of the night. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice was low but steady. "Who is this?" "It's Walker." Relief hit me like air after drowning. "Deputy, thank God." He cut me off. "Listen carefully. We're ready to move forward, but we need eyes on the inside. You've already proven you're not afraid of him." My pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" "You're our inside witness, Rachel," he said quietly. "We need your help catching them in the act." The line went dead, and I just sat there in the dark, phone still to my ear, realizing that standing up to Gerald wasn't just brave anymore. It was dangerous. "You're done here, Mrs. Carter. Sit down before I call enforcement." Gerald's voice thundered through the community hall, echoing off the beige walls and bouncing beneath the fluorescent lights. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me, some annoyed, some frightened, some just waiting to see me crumble. My cheeks burned as I stood, gripping the edge of the metal folding chair. It was the monthly HOA meeting, and I'd promised Deputy Walker I'd attend. This time, I wasn't there to ask questions. I was there to collect proof. Tucked beneath my blouse, taped just above my heart, was a small recording device the sheriff's office had given me. My only job was to get Gerald talking. "Why don't you tell everyone what law enforcement division you're talking about?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "The sheriff's department denies any partnership with this HOA." Gerald leaned forward at the table. eyes gleaming like a man who smelled blood. "We don't need permission from anyone to enforce our community standards," he barked. "You've made yourself a problem, Rachel. You think a few phone calls to the county make you a hero? You're nothing but a troublemaker." Gasps rippled across the room. My neighbors, people I'd shared lemonade and block parties with, stared at me like I'd just brought shame to the neighborhood. Gerald slammed his hand on the table. "You're done here, Mrs. Carter. Sit down before I call enforcement." I didn't move. I wanted him angry. The angrier he got, the more he revealed. I forced a smile. "Go ahead, call them. I'd love to see which department answers." His nostrils flared. For a moment, the mask slipped. Then he smoothed his tie and leaned back, his voice calm again, dangerous in its composure. "You don't understand how things work, Rachel. We've got backing from people who matter." That was it. Those words. The sentence Walker told me to wait for. I nodded slowly, pretending to sit down, my pulse racing. "People who matter," I repeated softly, loud enough for my recorder to catch. "Like who, Gerald? The sheriff?" He smirked. "Let's just say our friends wear badges, and they don't take kindly to insubordination." I felt my stomach twist. Around me the board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a woman with short gray hair, looked like she wanted to speak but didn't. The rest just sat in silence, fear painted on their faces. I gathered my things, keeping my head down as I moved toward the door. The tension in the room was suffocating. Nobody spoke. Nobody stopped me. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the rhythmic click of my heels against the linoleum floor. When I reached the exit, I glanced back one last time. Gerald was whispering to another man at the table, his hand covering his mouth. The recorder caught everything. Outside, the humid Texas air hit me like a wave. I could finally breathe. I got in my car, locked the doors, and texted Walker one word: "Got him." As the engine idled, I replayed the audio through my earbuds. His voice, arrogant and unguarded. "We've got backing from people who matter." I almost smiled through the adrenaline. Finally, proof. But before I could pull out of the parking lot, another sound came through on the recording. Faint, muffled, almost buried under the noise of people shuffling out. A man's voice, low, chilling. "She's about to disappear like the last one." I froze. The last one? My fingers trembled as I hit rewind, listening again. Same words, same tone. Cold, deliberate, certain. I looked around the empty lot, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. The clubhouse lights flickered off behind me, one by one. By the time I made it home, my nerves were shot. I checked every window, locked every door twice. I told myself it was just talk, just another threat meant to scare me. But around midnight, when I was finally starting to doze off, a sudden crash shattered the silence. Glass exploded across my living room floor. My heart leapt into my throat. I ducked behind the couch, grabbing the phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. And then I saw it. A rock lying in the middle of the carpet, wrapped in paper. With trembling fingers, I unrolled it. Big, blocky letters stared back at me, written in thick black marker. "Drop it or else." The phone slipped from my hand as I realized I was no longer just fighting lies and fines. I was fighting people who would destroy anyone who got in their way. "You brought this on yourself." Gerald's voice roared across the cul-de-sac as two men in neon vests yanked my mailbox out of the ground like it was a weed. The sound of metal scraping against concrete sent a chill through me. I ran out barefoot, phone already recording, the screen trembling in my hand. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted. "That's my property." One of the workers glanced up nervously, but Gerald stood behind them with his arms crossed, sunglasses glinting, even though the morning sun was barely up. "Board order, ma'am," he said smoothly. "Violation of HOA peace. We warned you." "Violation of what?" I snapped. "For what? Owning a camera? For sending proof of your little fake police force to the sheriff?" He tilted his head, lips curling into that smug grin I'd come to hate. You've been spreading lies, Rachel. The board can't let that slide. Your mailbox was installed without compliance review. We're correcting it. The workers hesitated, glancing between us. Gerald barked, "Keep going," and they obeyed. Dirt scattered across the curb as they loaded the mailbox into the back of a pickup truck. I filmed every second, zooming in on his face. "You're harassing me, Gerald. I've already reported this to law enforcement. Everything you're doing is being documented." He smiled wider. "Then make sure you get my good side." I wanted to scream, but I knew that's what he wanted. Instead, I stood silently until they drove off, mailbox and all. The neighbors had come out by then, gathering in small clusters. Some whispered, others shook their heads. A few even clapped. Gerald waved at them like a politician leaving a rally. When I went back inside, Ethan met me at the door, panic in his eyes. "Mom, where's my truck?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He pointed out the window. The driveway was empty. We ran outside. On the pavement, stuck beneath a small rock, was a folded piece of paper. It was an official-looking document. Thick stock, printed seal, stamped signature, but my eyes went straight to the heading, Sheriff Cooperation Order. Vehicle towed for community violation. My hands shook as I read it again. It looked real. Almost. But the seal, the same fake gold sheriff's star. I called Deputy Walker immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "Deputy, they've crossed the line. They just towed my son's truck and left fake paperwork." "Describe the document," he said sharply. "It says Sheriff Cooperation Order. Has that same gold star." I heard the sound of typing on his end. "That's fake. We've never issued anything like that. That's criminal impersonation. I'll have a report filed today. Don't confront them again." I exhaled shakily, the anger finally bubbling past the fear. "So what can I do, Deputy? They're vandalizing my property, stealing my things, and pretending to be you. For now," he said carefully, "you do it by the book. File complaints. County attorney, state licensing board, anyone with authority. We'll handle the criminal side. You just keep recording everything." That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Every fine, every threat, every fake seal. I filed 3 official complaints. One with the county attorney, one with the state HOA licensing division, and one directly with the sheriff's department. It took hours, but it felt like I was finally taking back some control. I wrote down what Walker had told me earlier that day, just so I'd remember. HOAs cannot enforce or seize property without judicial order. Every word of that sentence gave me a little more strength. Still, when the house got quiet, the unease crept back in. Somewhere out there, Gerald was planning his next move. My phone buzzed around 10 p.m. It was a text from Walker. "They're planning something Saturday. Don't stop them. Just film." My thumb hovered over the screen, heart hammering. Something Saturday. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be another letter or a fine. This time, Gerald was making it personal. I looked out the window at the empty spot where my mailbox used to be, and for the first time, I realized the fight for my home had just turned into a war. "Rachel Carter, come out now. You're under HOA investigation." The voice thundered down Maple Hollow Lane like a war cry. I shot upright from the kitchen table, my heart pounding so hard it felt like I could hear it in my ears. The morning light poured through the blinds, and for a second I thought I was still dreaming. But then came the pounding. Fists slamming against my front door, boots crunching over gravel, radios crackling with static. Through the window, I saw them. 6 of them this time. The same black tactical vests, the same gold sheriff's star stitched over the word community enforcement. Only now they'd multiplied. They marched in formation like soldiers, their boots moving in sync. 2 carried clipboards. One had a bullhorn. Another held what looked like a folder of eviction papers. I could barely breathe as one shouted again, "We have an HOA-issued eviction order. You're in violation of community compliance. Open the door or we'll enter." My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone. I whispered to myself, just film it. Don't engage. Just film. The camera shook as I lifted it toward the blinds. My voice, shaky but determined, filled the recording. It's Saturday morning. 6 men from the Maple Hollow HOA are outside my home claiming they have an eviction order. They're not police. I repeat, they're not real law enforcement. My son Ethan called from upstairs. Mom, what's happening? Stay there, I yelled back. Don't come down. The pounding grew louder. The leader, a tall man with a red armband, shouted, Final warning, ma'am. You're trespassing on HOA managed property. HOA managed? I muttered in disbelief. I own this house. The man lifted his radio, pressing the button. She's resisting. Proceed with escalation. That's when I heard it. The low growl of engines. Several of them. The air changed. Tires screeched, brakes squealed, and suddenly, blue and red lights exploded across my walls again. But this time, I recognized the sound. The real sirens. I peeked through the blinds just as 3 sheriff's cruisers boxed in the cul-de-sac. Doors flew open and real deputies spilled out, hands on their holsters. Sheriff's Department, one yelled. Everyone drop your weapons and step away from the property. The fake officers froze mid-step. Their faces went pale. One of them tried to pull off his vest like peeling off guilt, but it was too late. The neighborhood was alive now. Doors creaking open, blinds snapping upward, phones appearing in every window. For the first time, Maple Hollow was seeing what I'd been living through. And there, stepping out of the lead cruiser, was Deputy Walker. His jaw was set, eyes sharp. He raised his voice so the whole street could hear. Everyone holding a badge, drop it. Hands where I can see them. The imposters hesitated, glancing toward the end of the street. That's when I saw him, Gerald Hines, standing near the black SUV, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding whatever emotion flickered underneath. Even from behind glass, I could feel the arrogance radiating off him. Walker shouted again, You too, Hines, drop the radio and step forward. Gerald didn't move. One of the fake officers stammered, We were just following HOA protocol. Protocol? Walker barked. You're impersonating law enforcement. You think protocol is gonna save you? The real deputies surged forward, pinning the imposters one by one. Radios, clipboards, even their toy badges were confiscated. Gerald finally stepped forward, his calm facade cracking. You don't understand, he said, voice rising. We're maintaining order. The sheriff's office gave us authority months ago. Walker stared him down. Funny, I am the sheriff's office. And I've never met you. Gerald's jaw flexed. He tried to step back, but 2 deputies blocked him. The hum of neighbors' whispers filled the air like static, a wave of shock washing over the street. From my window I could see everything. The flashing lights bouncing off every manicured lawn, the same neighbors who had turned against me now clutching their phones, recording the truth. Walker pulled a pair of cuffs from his belt and stepped toward Gerald. Gerald Hines, he said, voice loud enough for the entire block to hear, you're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, falsifying public documents, and harassment. The clink of the cuffs echoed across Maple Hollow as Gerald's smirk finally disappeared. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But when Walker looked up and met my eyes, his face wasn't celebrating. It was warning me. Something told me this wasn't over. Gerald Hines, hands behind your back. You're finished. Deputy Walker's voice cut through the chaos like a gunshot. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before the scene around me exploded into movement. Real deputies swarming, neighbors pouring out of their homes, phones raised to capture the spectacle. From behind my window, I watched as Gerald, the man who'd terrorized me for months, finally realized his empire of intimidation was crumbling. The once slick HOA president stood frozen beside his SUV. Face red, sunglasses gone, his eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. 2 deputies grabbed his wrists and twisted them behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed down the street. A murmur spread through the crowd. Disbelief, satisfaction, a touch of fear. I'd never seen Maple Hollow like this. Masks off, illusions shattered. Gerald tried to keep his voice steady. You don't understand. I was protecting this community. People like her. He jerked his chin toward my house. They undermine order. Walker stepped closer, expression carved from stone. You weren't protecting anyone, Hines. You were extorting them. You don't get to hide behind badges you printed at a copy shop. The tension was electric. Deputies opened the back of Gerald's SUV, revealing boxes stacked with paperwork, fake IDs, forged fine notices, and entire binders of Community Enforcement Division forms, complete with the counterfeit county seal. There were even laminated officer authorization cards with made-up badge numbers. One deputy pulled out a folder labeled Active Citations. Inside were the names of nearly every homeowner in Maple Hollow, each file stamped with fake law enforcement seals. My name sat near the top. Walker turned to the watching crowd. If you've been fined by this man or his board, contact our office. Effective immediately, these notices are null and void. Gasps rippled through the neighbors. Some looked angry, others ashamed. I saw one woman, the same who'd glared at me at meetings, wipe away tears. I paid him 3 times, she whispered. He said it was for county code enforcement. The truth was spilling out faster than anyone could stop it. Then the media vans rolled in. Word must have spread over the scanners, because within minutes, cameras were flashing, reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust toward Walker. The once private street of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes was suddenly a crime scene, and a headline. Sheriff's Department busts fake police ring inside Texas HOA, one reporter shouted. How long did this go on? Another asked. Walker didn't answer. He was already focused on Gerald, who was trying to twist his narrative one last time. I wasn't impersonating anyone, Gerald shouted as deputies led him toward the cruiser. We had authority. This community needed structure. The sheriff's office knew. Walker cut him off. The only structure you had was built on lies. He pulled open the car door. You're done, Gerald. The door slammed, muffling the last of Gerald's protests. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears on my hands. Months of fear, humiliation, and anger all melting away into something heavier. Relief mixed with exhaustion. Walker walked over to me a few minutes later, his tone softer now. You did good, Rachel. Your footage, your reports, it all helped make this happen. I swallowed hard. So it's really over? He hesitated, eyes narrowing toward the clubhouse in the distance. We're not sure yet. We're searching the HOA office now. If he had help, we'll find it. I nodded, but part of me didn't want to believe it was finished. Evil like Gerald's didn't grow in a vacuum. It spread, it infected. The next few days were a blur. News crews camped outside the neighborhood. Neighbors who once avoided me now knocked on my door, offering apologies, casseroles, even hugs. The board officially dissolved under county oversight, and Maple Hollow was suddenly a place without rules or leadership. But just when life began to quiet down, when I thought the storm had finally passed, my phone rang late one evening. The caller ID read Tarrant County Sheriff's Office. I answered instantly. Walker? His voice was grave, stripped of the calm professionalism I'd grown used to. Rachel, we found something in Gerald's office. Something bigger than we expected. My grip on the phone tightened. What is it? He paused. I can't say over the phone. Come in tomorrow morning. The line went dead, and I stared at the dark reflection in my window. The words, something bigger looping in my mind. Whatever Gerald had been hiding, it wasn't over. It was just buried deeper. He made $200,000 pretending to be law enforcement. That was the first thing out of Deputy Walker's mouth when I stepped into the sheriff's office the next morning. His tone wasn't angry, it was disgusted. He led me through a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets into a conference room where 2 investigators sat surrounded by stacks of documents, laptops, and cardboard evidence boxes marked Maple Hollow HOA. Walker motioned for me to sit. You should see this for yourself. One of the investigators, a woman with dark hair tied in a bun, pushed a folder toward me. Inside were pages of financial statements, fake invoices, and photocopies of checks. Each was neatly stamped with the same phony sheriff's star I'd come to know too well. These, she said, tapping the papers, were billed as community maintenance fees. Landscaping, neighborhood patrol, equipment rentals, all fake. The funds were routed to shell companies registered under names like Maple Hollow Services LLC and Civic Enforcement Solutions. Guess who owns both? I didn't have to answer. Gerald Hines, Walker said flatly. He set up 4 different LLCs to funnel HOA dues and fake fines straight into his personal accounts. So far, we've tracked nearly $200,000. My stomach turned. He stole from all of us. Every homeowner. Walker nodded. And that's not all. The uniforms, the SUV, even the fake badges were bought with HOA funds. He created an entire false security branch to legitimize his scam, and everyone paid for it. The investigator added, "We also found fabricated contracts between the HOA and a supposed law enforcement liaison office. It doesn't exist." Gerald wrote the contracts himself. I sank back into the chair, anger and disbelief twisting inside me. The arrogance of it, pretending to be a savior while robbing us blind. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. Walker's eyes met mine. "The district attorney's filing charges for fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, and racketeering. He'll be facing federal time." It should have felt like victory, but instead there was a strange hollowness in my chest. After everything, the threats, the fear, the sleepless nights, this was how it ended? With paper trails and bank accounts? Walker must have sensed it. "You did more than anyone, Rachel. Without your footage, he'd still be playing sheriff." I nodded slowly, forcing a faint smile. He always said he had backing from people who mattered. Walker gave a bitter laugh. Turns out, the only people backing him were the ones he conned. Before I left, the investigator handed me a thin pamphlet. If your neighbors want protection, they can file for receivership. When HOA leadership commits fraud, homeowners have the right to petition the court to take temporary control of the community's assets. Receivership. The word felt heavy, bureaucratic, but powerful. For once, it meant the homeowners had leverage. By the end of that week, Maple Hollow Estates was officially dissolved. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen, the board disbanded, and the county stepped in as temporary overseer until a new structure could be established. The day the announcement came, I stood on my front lawn and watched as workers removed the Maple Hollow Community Security signs from every corner of the neighborhood. It felt like exorcising a ghost. The fake authority that had controlled our lives for years was finally gone. Neighbors started to thaw again. Mr. Jenkins from across the street brought over coffee and apologized for believing Gerald's lies. The woman who'd once reported me for a flag violation stopped by to hug me. "You were right all along," she said through tears. For the first time, Maple Hollow felt like a real community. No fines, no threats, no fear. Just people trying to start over. But the peace didn't last. 1 week later, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. The first piece of official-looking mail since the HOA's collapse. The return address read, Tarrant Development Group, LLC. I tore it open, expecting another update from the county. Instead, the letter inside was short, clean, and cold. Notice of acquisition. Tarrant Development Group has purchased Maple Hollow Estates and requests community cooperation in reinstating the Homeowners Association effective immediately. At the bottom, in bold letters, board elections to be held next month. My fingers went numb. As I read the final line, leadership candidates will be selected by developer nomination. One thought pulsed through my mind. Someone was trying to rebuild the very system we'd just torn down. "We're bringing back the old HOA rules, Ms. Carter. Same structure, same system." The man at the front of the meeting room said it like it was good news, like the nightmare we'd all just lived through was something worth repeating. The banner behind him read Tarrant Development Group, rebuilding Maple Hollow together. But all I could see were the words same system. The same words that had stolen my peace, my safety, and months of my life. I stood in the back of the community hall, arms crossed, fighting the surge of anger building in my chest. The developers had brought glossy posters showing revitalized amenities, enhanced community guidelines, and of course, board reinstatement. To them, Maple Hollow was a project, a profit, not a home. One of the representatives, a man in an expensive suit with a too smooth voice, clicked his remote. The next slide appeared. Community enforcement policy. Restoring neighborhood order. That did it. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. Not this time, I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the hum of small talk. Not under those rules. Every head turned toward me. For a moment, the room was silent. Then whispers broke out, cautious and nervous. The man at the front smiled tightly. Ms. Carter, we appreciate your passion, but the HOA model has proven effective for… I cut him off. Effective? You mean the same model that allowed a con man to play sheriff and steal $200,000? The same system that terrorized this neighborhood under fake authority? He started to respond, but I kept going, louder this time. You can rebuild the houses, but you can't rebuild trust with the same foundation that destroyed it. We're not living under intimidation again. A few neighbors clapped softly. Then more. Then half the room. It wasn't loud. Not yet. But it was enough. After the meeting, a crowd gathered around me in the parking lot. They weren't afraid anymore. People who'd once avoided me now wanted advice. You know the law, Rachel. One neighbor said. You stood up before. Tell us what we can do. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew who did. That night, I called Deputy Walker. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. So they're trying to bring the HOA back, huh? Yeah, I replied. And they're using the same language, enforcement, compliance, all of it. He sighed. Then it's time you made sure it's done right. With Walker's help and a volunteer attorney from the county, we began drafting a new set of bylaws. This time, there would be transparency, open books, term limits, clear boundaries. Most importantly, any mention of law enforcement authority was banned outright. The community could have structure, but not tyranny. We held meetings in my living room, neighbors crowding around the dining table with coffee mugs and stacks of papers. I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Unity. People argued, laughed, shared stories, and built something real together. When the developer finally called for elections, I decided to run. Not out of ego, but out of duty. I couldn't stand by and let Maple Hollow fall into the wrong hands again. The day of the vote, the community center was packed. I gave one simple speech. We've lived through what happens when power goes unchecked. Let's make sure it never happens again. When the ballots were counted, I won unanimously. There wasn't applause. There was relief. That evening, I stood outside my home, looking at the sunset spilling gold across the street. Kids were riding bikes again. Neighbors were talking over fences, and for the first time, Maple Hollow felt alive. Real. Ours. We started cleaning out the old HOA office a week later. The one Gerald had ruled from like his personal kingdom. Dust coated everything, the air stale with forgotten arrogance. As I packed away old files, one folder caught my eye. It was tucked behind a drawer, nearly hidden, its label written in Gerald's sharp handwriting. Operation Renewal. I frowned, flipping it. Open. Inside were blueprints, lists of names, and something that made my stomach drop. At the top of the first page, underlined twice, were the words, New Partnership Approval Pending, Tarrant Development Group. Gerald Hines, guilty on all counts, the judge declared, her gavel striking with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. The sound was final, heavy and absolute. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out all at once. Months of fear, exhaustion, and anger washed out of me in that single moment. Gerald sat at the defendant's table, his once perfect posture gone, his shoulders slumped. The man who had barked orders through bullhorns, who strutted around Maple Hollow like a self-made sheriff, now looked small, just another criminal facing the consequences of his choices. The clerk read the charges aloud. Fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, harassment, and racketeering. Each word felt like a brick being lifted off my chest. The judge sentenced him to serve time in state prison, along with restitution to every homeowner he'd extorted. There would be no more HOA meetings, no more fines, no more fear. Across the aisle, Deputy Walker caught my eye. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave a small nod. It was the kind of gesture that said everything without words. You did it. As the deputies led Gerald away, I thought about how easily power can twist into something dangerous. How authority, when left unchecked, can feed on fear until it feels untouchable. And how people like me, quiet, rule-following, just trying to live, become collateral in someone else's hunger for control. But I also thought about the night the real sheriff's cruisers pulled onto my street, lights flashing for justice instead of intimidation. I thought about my neighbors finally standing up beside me, and I thought about the sound of those fake badges hitting the pavement. The moment Maple Hollow stopped being afraid. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter, cleaner. The news crews were still outside, cameras pointed toward the doors. I didn't stop for interviews. I just wanted to go home. To sit on my porch, under a flag that no one could find me for flying, and listen to the quiet. Before leaving, Walker had left me with one last reminder. Always verify who you're dealing with. HOAs, inspectors, even officials, anyone claiming power. Impersonation and coercion are crimes for a reason. He was right. Real authority protects. It doesn't control. And as I looked down my peaceful street, I wondered, what would you do if your HOA claimed to have law enforcement power? Tell your story. Because in the end, no matter how deep they try to bury it, the truth always finds its way to the light.